Hi, I'm Andy Skinner.
I'm John Nelson, and thank you so much for joining us for this virtual user conference from our homes. Andy and I welcome you. We've got 18 hours of content to get through in the next 45 minutes, so buckle up and let's learn about some base maps. There's so many base maps. Which ones are right for you? What are the differences? Let's get started. My name is John Nelson. I'm a cartographer and I develop user experiences for the Living Atlas here at Esri. I also make lots of educational resources, how-tos for making maps and that kind of thing. And one of the places you can find that stuff is on my YouTube channel, linked here. Lots of great resources, including some of the things that we're going to show you today.
Okay, my name is Andy Skinner. I've been working as a cartographer forever, but the last 10 years has been with Esri. I'm now with the Living Atlas content team, and I work on base maps, color ramps, and pretty much anything else that they care to throw at me.
Now, there are just tons of base maps. So what Andy and I are going to do is talk about, well, first of all, where to find them. So I want to show Andy which maps people really seem to like the most.
Yep, that sounds good. Okay, so let's have a look at some numbers. These numbers are from 2019. The 2020 numbers, the 2020's got so skewed by maps that we've done for the coronavirus. The base maps that we used in the back of them, the figures for them are off the roof, through the roof. These are based on raster base maps for 2019. Having said that, I'm not sure that the number of visits, I'm not sure exactly how critical that number is or even what it means. But I think the ratio that we're seeing here is important. And what we're seeing is that the topographic map gets far and away the most hits over all of the base maps that we have available to us. And the reason for this, well, I mean, it's a good map. I'm not trying to suggest it isn't. And it's useful in many circumstances, but it's also the default.
The
And many of
default.
the default, yes. And many users don't get past that default map.
Mhm.
So that, basically a lot of people will see that and just build over the top of it
Sure.
and let it go. What we want to do is to encourage you to think past that default and try out some of our other base maps.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the people who pick defaults are the most powerful people in the world.
Yeah.
So we're hopeful that you can see what's available and make some active choices.
So let's go to the Living Atlas. The URL is easy enough. I've put it up there, but if you do a Google search on Living Atlas, then you'll find it. And let's have a look at where you can find these maps. So I'll go to Browse, and we've got a Base Maps tab, so that's a good start. Pretty indiscriminate, we've got all sorts of things coming in here. So let's discriminate it a little bit. I'll cut it back to the vector tile maps, which are the ones we're talking about primarily today. And let's make it Esri only content so that you're seeing the ones that we've created. And now you can see, if I put on show more, you're seeing we've got a fairly big selection of base maps available, more so down here. So, you can keep going on this. So we've been busy. Let's open one of them up. I'll open the colored pencil up. So click on that, you'll get to the details screen. Click on the thumbnail and you're in. So there is the active base map. If I go to content, you can see it's in the base map tab.
Which is a really cool base map, by the way.
And this one is pretty cool. Yeah, this is by Cindy Prostak, one of my colleagues on the base map team, who did a lot of these sort of more decorative maps that we've got. So that is how to navigate your way through to find the base maps the simple way.
Okay, and I'll show you how to do this in ArcGIS Pro. Here we are in ArcGIS Pro, and I've got queued up the friendly old default base map here, this time in an equal Earth projection, beautiful projection. Now, if you want to change the base map, of course, you can pick from this set of base maps in the gallery, and that's determined by the organization that you're signed in as. And later on, I'll show you how to actually change this, which is a lot of fun. But if you add data, there's a really interesting tab here called Living Atlas within the portal group. So I'm in the Add Data dialog. Living Atlas is selected, and now I can do a search really just like Andy did, but I'm in the context of Pro. So I can pull in any base map. So let's see here, maybe Vibrant. So I'll add in the Vibrant base map, which has been added to the Living Atlas, and there it is. So this is how you would change the base map in ArcGIS Pro to something that's not within this gallery. Now, how about ArcGIS Online? How do you do this? So here I am in ArcGIS Online, and I've got a nice light gray base map here. And I can, like in Pro, navigate this gallery of base maps that are provided for me to choose from, or I can add whatever I want, again, from the Living Atlas. So I'll choose the Living Atlas and I'll search this. So in this case, I'll look for the Vibrant base map here. And I can add this. If I were just to click this add button simply, it would add these tiles on top of my existing base map, which is a cool option. But if you wanted to replace this base map with the Vibrant base map, you select its name, and down here there's this great option called Use as Base Map. And if I choose this, it will replace the base map that was there previously instead of adding it as a layer on top of that base map. Now, I was showing you this set of base maps that's available by default. Now, if you have the permissions, if you're the keeper of the keys within your organization and you're able to go to the settings for your organization, I'll show you how to change that and modify and edit and who knows what that gallery. So in the organization tab, the sub tab called settings, there's an option called map. And right here in this group called Basemap gallery, you can point to a group of maps. So in this case, there's a group called Custom Basemaps for Default Gallery. But let's say I want to change that to a group that I've made. And in this case, I've called it Some Basemaps. And now you can see it's successfully changed. And if I were to go back to a default look at my map, my base map gallery is now reflecting the content from that group, which is a different set of base maps. You aren't stuck.
So there's no excuse for finding any of our base maps, really,
No
is there?
excuses. You're right, Andy. Zero excuses. You're absolutely right. Okay, so when it comes to picking a base map, which one works best for me, which one is good for you? And I like to think of base maps as being broken out into two distinct groups. There's the base map, and then there's the base map. And they're two very different things, and they serve different purposes. And I'll talk through those two things. So a base map is a lot like the plate that this delicious looking meal is sitting on. It looks like that rosemary might go down a little hard, but the plate is there just to serve up the thematic content of the map. It's not there to steal the show, it's only there to support it. And an example of this might be the human geography light base map, the light gray base map. There's some really nice options, and it doesn't have a ton of content and colors shouting at you and getting in the way of the thematic data. Alternatively, there are base maps designed really to be the product itself. So these plates are obviously very ornate and painted, and they exist just to be the plate. And if I were to put food on top of it, the plate is going to steal the show from the food potentially. And that's a viable use case. I mean, here's an example of the OpenStreetMap base map, which exists to show you all of the content and features and points of interest and labels that are available with that OpenStreetMap data. This is here to show you OpenStreetMap data. It's here to show you itself. It's not necessarily here as the foundation for a thematic map. Putting thematic data on top of this would get eclipsed. Now, You may have seen in my previous slides that I was using a slightly different looking map. That's intriguing, right? Well, it's a sneak peek to the Map Viewer beta. And if you want to try out the Map Viewer beta, you can get to it by that little hamburger menu at the top of your org and choose Map Viewer beta to explore that.
So let's take a closer look at the base maps that we do provide. And there is a logic to what we do. On the left here are what we're calling base maps. John's just explained what we mean about that: high content, strong colors. Good for showing point information, particularly if you use a strong symbol. Line info if you're careful. Not so good for area information such as choropleth, so you've got to be a little bit careful with that. On the right are the true base maps, subdued colors, grayscale in particular, and you can see here we've got on the right, we've got the light gray canvas and the human geography. And then we try to get a mix of base maps between there so that hopefully we're covering all of the bases with it, so that you can find one that is particularly suited to what you're doing. We've always also split these light to dark, light at the top, dark at the bottom, and that's another choice that you have. You can get some very impactful maps working on dark base maps, but there are some very specific ways of using them, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more as we go on. So all of our maps sort of follow that basic rule, but that's not the whole story. So here we're seeing a few other groupings that we have, and John also already talked about the OpenStreetMap. We started building the OpenStreetMap, I think it was last year, it may have been the year before. We've created a vector tile map from the OpenStreetMap data with their collaboration. And we're now getting in and sort of building some other maps around that model. So in OpenStreetMap data, we've got the streets, the classic Esri streets look, as well as their design. We've also got a couple of canvas maps, and there are some more out there as well. And you'll be seeing more of them, hopefully, as we get through the next year. We also, you may not realize that we've got local languages available, 24 different languages available around the world. We've also got the community map, which is our equivalent of OpenStreetMap's editorial thing. You can get in here and you can edit our base map through the community map. There's information available on how to do that. I think there are discussions going on about it as well during the conference. We encourage you to do that. It's great fun. And particularly if you're working in an area where you want to use our base maps, but you want to enhance your local area, then this is a good way to do it. We do create other projections. The only one that we do universally, or more or less universally, is WGS 84. You're not stuck with using Web Mercator. You can use the WGS 84, particularly if you're maybe with an organization that prefers that projection to be used, or if you're working in 3D, particularly in a global view, then the WGS 84 gives a much better wraparound. We will be talking a little bit more about other projections.
Right, if
as
you're
we
feeling
go on.
dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And then finally, we get to have some fun as well. So these are our creative maps. We all get to play with these. Really, to an extent, we sort of please ourselves. We do them to try and have some fun, as I say, but also to try a few ideas out and see if we can just stretch our technology a little one.
Okay, so another way that you can categorize these base map tiles is, are they a bitmap, pixelated raster, or are they vector? Are they made up of points, lines, and polygons, and then styling rules? And there are a host of options of both. Let's talk about those. Raster tiles have to be pre-made, pre-generated, cooked, and sitting there ready to go. And that can actually be pretty large. And if you have a change in your data, you have to recook it. But they're there, and they're called up by the person using the base map up into the browser. Now, the difference between that and a vector-based map is a vector-based map uses that vector geometry and has all of that data sitting there, and that's the data itself is served up to the user's browser, And there's a set of style rules that just dictate, almost like CSS does to a web page, how that data looks. And the cool thing about that is it's generally lighter weight. You can make updates to the data without having to throw away all the baked tiles that you've made. And you can pretty easily change those style rules. So here's an example of a couple of vector base maps. This is the gray canvas on the left, and then the corporate there on the right. The corporate on the right was based on the light gray canvas. We just changed the colors for it because it's very straightforward to do that. Here's an example using raster tiles. A raster, of course, is pretty much a must for imagery, because imagery in its nature is pixels. And so those continue to be raster tiles. And then there's this really nice, vibrant base map developed in conjunction with Visuality and the Half Earth project. That's raster. So anything very complex and detailed with lots of pixel information would be a raster base map. Now, raster base maps can pose a little bit of a challenge when it comes to file storage. So if you were looking at the whole world at this scale, you've got one tile essentially. And then every time you zoom in a level, it takes 4 more tiles to cover that same geographic area as your previous zoom level. So you've got 4x plus all of the tiles above that. And every time you zoom in, it's a quadrupling of that layer. And it blows up fast. It's exponential. We've only gotten to this zoom level, and we're not even really that far zoomed in, but you can see how that becomes a little bit onerous, I guess, burdensome. That's a nice hybrid word.
I'll go with that. That sounds a good word.
Onersome for storing all of those tiles. So give vector base maps a thought.
Okay, so raster base maps, I guess you could call it old technology. I mean, as John said, things like imagery are always going to be around. But the base maps are not going away anytime soon. You still need to use them if you're working in ArcMap, for example. ArcMap doesn't accept vector tile base maps. However, starting this year, some of them are going into mature support, which means that they'll still be there, but we won't be updating or maintaining them. And the plan is that the remainder of them will transition next year. Now, if you're still working in ArcMap, I realize this isn't ideal, but remember that you can always replace the map when you publish online with the vector version or another vector base map if you like. The differences, there are style differences between the two base maps, but they're not great. So that if you've built a map in ArcMap on, say, the topographic map, and you switch to the vector map in online, then it shouldn't look too far out of place. So that's the way to carry on with that as things are at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about one more way to categorize or think about base maps, and that's light versus dark. Which side? The light side or the dark side? And there's some considerations to make when make this choice. Like if you have a dark portal or a dark website and you have a light base map, it's going to look weird. It'll look out of place and kind of like you're staring into a light bulb, or the reverse of that thing. So consider its surroundings, where the map is going to live. Also, consider your user's surroundings. Maybe they're using this on a mobile device, out on a work site, and it's a sunny day, you'd want something light. Or if they're using this on a tablet in a dark car, or if they're in a command center in a dark room, you don't want it to be a very bright base map. You want it to be dark and subdued so it doesn't hurt people's eyeballs looking at it all day. And then dark versus light will have an emotional impact on the way that your map is perceived and the way that it communicates its phenomenon. And lastly, contrast drives meaning. So light versus dark is an important consideration when you couple that with the color scheme that you're using for thematic data that you might put on top of that map.
Okay, so let's have a look at this dark versus light in a bit more detail. What you're looking at here, this is a choropleth map. It's average household income, but that is not important. I've adjusted these to look good to demonstrate what we're talking about here. So don't read too much into the information that you're seeing here. And this is a conventional approach. It's using a light base map. It's using the human geography light base map. And the lightest areas are the lowest values and the darkest areas are the highest. So household income is higher in Boston and New York, which I don't think that's a surprise. So everybody understands how a map like this works. If we go to a dark base, then the reverse is true. So if I toggle between these two, you can see here the light is the strongest value and the dark is the lowest value. But how many people would look at this map and think the reverse? Because we're so trained to think light to dark as being the value, that even though within the context of this map it makes sense, a lot of people are going to try and read this map the wrong way around. So let me add some color to this. So what we try and do, instead of saying dark to light, we say dark to bright. And the reason for this is that we want to really telegraph the fact that the strong values are the lightest or the brightest on the map. So here I've got this very in-your-face yellow at the top, and then as the colors fade back, I subdue them and take them sort of in towards gray so that they fall back into the map. And that hopefully is going to make it a bit clearer to people what you're trying to do. Now, of course, you'll probably have a legend available, which is the always the get out clause. But online, you shouldn't be relying on a legend. You want people to get an intuitive feel for how the map is working.
Yeah, true.
So this, I think, is working a lot better, but you still need to ask yourself hard questions. Is this working in this context? Are people going to get confused? And if you're worried about it, then maybe go for another way of building this information. So here, it's the same information, but I've used proportional circles. And this technique is actually quite fun. We've used this a few times, which is to put a transparency value on the color and then put a hard outline on the symbol to sort of hold its shape. And then the way that they accumulate within the high population areas that we're seeing here, the high income areas, sort of telegraph what you're trying to do. It can look quite attractive.
Okay, let's take a look at world imagery. World imagery is actually an insanely popular base. It's like the flagship base map, right? And it bears a little bit of a closer look. So let's take a look. When would you want to use imagery as a base map, and when might you consider avoiding it? When's it not ideal? And generally, you know, the distillation of all this text here is if you've got data that's going to fight with the bright, bold colors of your underlying imagery, maybe consider something else, because your underlying imagery can clash with the thematic content and bias the interpretation that is meant to happen. And it's also easy to lose track of thematic content if it's sitting on top of a very busy base map. But if you've got a map and it's really important to show the texture and the color and the land cover of an area, then by all means, imagery is the way to go. But it's worth a consideration. In the latest version of World Imagery Basemap, we've made some changes. We've made it much brighter and vibrant. So compared to the previous version, which is here, it's clearly darker. And we've also done something called bumpification. So if I turn on the new version, off, on, you can see there's a little bit of topographic information that's feathered in at these scales. And that's valuable for an interpretive sense, to give you an impression of topography where you wouldn't necessarily see that in just the imagery itself. So previous, current, previous, current. You can see the mountains start to pop. And when you zoom in, that enhanced topography falls away to show you the full literal imagery of the world imagery base map, where true interpretation is important.
This is getting very close to what the old relief artists used to do when they were building by hand.
Oh yeah, cool. I like to hear that. That's great. I love those sorts of things. So here is Firefly. Now we had talked about what's appropriate for putting under a thematic map. Now, if you need the texture in the context of imagery, but you also want to have a thematic map that uses colors, then consider Firefly. So Firefly is just world imagery that's been darkened and desaturated and kind of shifted to the poles to a a darkened, desaturated version of imagery. You can still see imagery, and you get the context of the actual land cover, but you aren't pushing all that saturation to clash with thematic data that sits on top. Plus, it's a little bit dramatic and it looks kind of cool. This has been updated from the previous version of Firefly. So this is the previous version of Firefly. It's been updated to include more well aggregated top of world looks at the land cover instead of this kind of very, in some places, quite busy area. So we've thought about thematic uses and smoothing that out. And we've noticed that a lot of oceanic data was being used in the Firefly base map. And so we brought out the bathymetry information a little bit more in this updated version. Now, the cool thing about Firefly is as you zoom in and the true geographic context is important for a place, then it subtly shifts into full color. So it's kind of tapering that saturation until you hit the street level where, of course, it's full color saturation.
Okay, the map sandwich.
Which sounds delicious, Andy, by the way.
Yes, yes.
I don't know who
first. Don't know who first came up with this name. We've been using it for the last 10 years that I know of, but it's actually a good name for it. What we're talking about here is the idea of a map that's split into components so that it can interact with what you're doing. And the classic one on that is the canvas base maps, the light gray one here. So the concept is that you've got a layer, which we call the base layer, which has all of the line, polygon, all of that information in it. And then above it, you have the label layer or reference layer, which sits above your subject information. So you sandwich your material in between these two layers. And it works pretty well. And a lot of our base maps work like this. And we've developed that theme in a few different directions. The most extreme is the human geography, which was built particularly for our demographics people and our policy maps group.
I love
some of the
that
stuff
base
they
map,
were doing.
by the way.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And the idea here is you've got a base, which is basically just a very light polygon to establish something for you to work with. And then your subject matter goes in there. And then above that, you have a detail layer, which is designed to work with a high degree of transparency so that it melts into your information. And then above that, you've got the label layer, which can be either full strength, or if you want to blend that in a little bit, you can as well. Makes it very versatile, and it means there's quite a bit you can do. It gives you a lot of control over how the map works.
The delicious map.
The delicious map. This is another one that we work with, which is the terrain with labels map, which is another sandwich map. If I open up the base map here, you can see that we're dealing with 3 layers here, which is the hillshade, which is our standard raster hillshade, and then the base, and then the reference. You may not be aware of this. Here's a useful trick. I will move those layers out from the base map. And the reason I did that was so that I can switch those off. So what I can show you is, here's the base layer, which includes the streets, it includes some polygons, water, a minimum of information because we don't want to cover up the hillshade too much. And then above that, we have the reference layer. And then we also, let me move those back in now. I can now move that back into the base map. I can move that into the base map. And I'm going to show you another neat trick here. Let me first put on, this came from the Living Atlas. This is USA forest types. I just needed a layer to sandwich in there. You can see at the moment the labels are sitting below there. But if I go in there and say, set that as a reference layer, now they've come out on top, and they will, under pretty well all circumstances, they will shift to the top in your layer sequence. So that's quite a powerful tool.
Yeah, it is. Even though in the list here on the left, the table of contents, it's sitting underneath the forestry type layer. It knows to render itself atop because it's a reference layer. That's great.
So this is how the map is intended to be used. But there's a bit of a problem with it because when you go in, you'll see that some of these roads, the minor roads, are really pretty difficult to see. So there's no reason why that shouldn't also become a reference layer. And then those roads are really popping.
Wow. Yeah, that's
So
amazing.
yeah, what we're sort of basically saying here is that don't necessarily stick with what we tell you the base map should be. You can use these in any way that you think is appropriate.
Yes, blank base maps. So if you look in the Living Atlas and you type the word blank, you do a search for blank, you'll see a couple options, blank white base map and blank black base map. And what are those? Why would you want a blank base map? Sometimes you just want a blank base map. Sometimes you want a background that you have full control over the color and you can, change the style of it. Sometimes your data is so dense that it can serve as its own base map, and you just want this kind of null thing sitting there behind the scenes. So follow this link if you're at all intrigued by this idea. And I've been surprised by the hacks that people have used it for, and it's really encouraging and it's a lot of fun. So sometimes the base map is no base map.
Yeah, we want you to use our base maps, but it's not compulsory.
Well, technically this is a base map, Andy, so we still got them.
Well, okay, yeah, I take your point. Okay, like I said in the last one, the base map doesn't have to be what we tell you it is. There's no reason why you shouldn't mix things up a little bit, and we're going to take that a step further now. Okay, this will be familiar to John. This is his corporate map again. And this is, again, another of my old stamping grounds. I've moved around a little bit. Chicago, John's corporate map is designed in a very specific way. At the moment, I've got an extra layer on top there. Let me zoom in on Millennium Park. And the map holds up pretty well, but as you get further down, there comes a point when the map really isn't performing any purpose anymore. And it'd be really nice at a scale like this to be able to switch to something like imagery. So let's do that. There's the imagery, but now as I come out, the map starts to reassert itself. So that is actually pretty easy to do. And what John did and what I've done in the past is add the world imagery to the map as an extra layer in the base layers, and then duplicate that corporate base map 3 or 4 times. Then what we're going to do is use the visibility range to limit the scales at which these features come up. So here you can see that we're beyond the base map at the moment.
Beyond the pale.
Beyond the pale, yeah. And here you can see that John limited it to pretty well 1 scale. Mm-hmm. And then what happens is the transparency is set in there at differing levels so that as you zoom in, the transparency starts to assert itself. So you go in and now you can see the imagery coming through, and then eventually we're all the way and you're looking at the bean, which for people who live in Chicago, they'll know what the bean is.
Yeah, it's like a handshake between a vector map and imagery, and you get the best of both based on scale.
Yeah, it's a nice little technique and one that's worth playing with.
Andy, see how that little yellow circle, pink square, and blue triangle in that layer? You can change the style of any vector base map, which is really cool and a lot of fun. I was talking about how it's just ingredients and style rules. Okay, now here I am in the Living Atlas. Now there's a great app. You could change the style of the base map right in the map viewer where Andy was, or if you want a little bit more flexibility, you can open the full app itself. So in the Living Atlas, I'll search for Vector Tile Style Editor. And there it is, and I'm just going to open it. Yes, let's get started. Now, you can pick existing maps. You can pick from the creative maps. You can pick from the base kind of maps that we've been talking about, labels and references, all of Esri's base maps or base maps that I've already made before, and open it up here and just start editing it wholesale. This tool is really fantastic, and it gives you lots of different ways to change the appearance of your map. So the widths of things, the colors of things, the textures, the fonts. So it's categorical, so that I can do just a quick edit, and I can randomize this to cycle through different color schemes. I can change individual elements individually, and there's just a lot of elements. I can do, and this is fantastic, just a wholesale replacement of every color that uses each of these things if I wanted to change the palette overall. And then icons and text and things. It's really a lot of fun. So let me just quickly show you an example. I'll just hit random. I'll roll the dice, and rolling the dice gives you a lot of crazy stuff, but occasionally you'll get something that's actually quite intriguing and kind of fun. And I haven't gotten there yet. Here's an example. This isn't too bad. So I've just hit randomize, and you can see how quickly this is the same data, just the style rules have been updated, and I'm seeing the difference. And then I can tweak this to look however I like. Maybe I want to change it to my corporate brand colors to have a branded base map, or maybe I want something fully designed for the map that I'm building. I can create my own base map, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah, you're never going to get a finished base map doing this, but it's great for just sort of getting the brain cells going and thinking, that could work.
Yeah,
with a bit of effort.
You mean hitting the randomize button?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what I like to do is hit randomize until I see something good, and or just go here and start changing each one of these.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. So
or if you want to really get down and dirty, then you can go to the layers palette and start changing things individually.
Yes. Yeah. Which eventually you probably should do as a
Yeah.
responsible geographer. But have fun.
You may be a person who prefers to work with the raw code, and we've got an editor that is available for you to do that. It's a simple thing. There's nothing clever about it. All it's doing is giving you the code on the left and then a preview of the map on the right. This is the version of the canvas map that I've got saved onto my account. If I zoom down through here, you can see there are close to 9,000 layers in there, which is pretty crazy. And this is one of our simpler base maps. So, you need to know your way around the code to a certain extent. Actually, I started out working by hand and working with shooting lists and all sort of stuff like this. And whichever way I've worked, be it like that or with Illustrator or now with GIS and now with this, the situation's pretty much the same. It's still a list of layers, and you just need to understand how the layers work, and then you're off and running. If you need to make a change to this, it's easy enough. Let's just go in there and I'll type in something really offensive and hit apply style. I told you it was offensive. And it's as simple as that to actually change a color, make it a little less offensive, and that, not a lot, but just a bit. If you don't like what you've done, you can hit undo, or there is a reset button as well. Once you've got it where you want it to be, then you hit save.
When it comes to markup, I would definitely need the reset button.
Yeah. The other nice thing about this is that the canvas map is only using a small portion of the data that's available in our vector tile package for these base maps. If you look at a map like the street map, for example, which is much more comprehensive, then you'll see that there's a lot that can be added to this map. The only way at the moment to add the data is to go and add it as a section of code in here. So you can either go and find the code in, say, the street map and copy and paste it in, or if you're really confident, you can actually build the code yourself. So for example, if you wanted to add a coastline onto here, then you would bring in the relevant section of code, and that would work pretty well. For those of you that want to use this, there's a quick URL to find out where it is.
Okay, so far, a lot of the maps that you've seen in these Basemap examples use the Mercator projection. Andy mentioned that WGS 84 is generally available as an alternate for all of Esri's Basemaps. But you can create Basemaps of whatever projection you like, which is a lot of fun. And you do it in ArcGIS Pro. And if you check out that link right there, I'll walk you through a few examples of web maps that I've made in different projections that are equal area, which is important for thematic mapping, and how to create them in ArcGIS Pro. So check out that URL. Okay, so as promised, here is a look at the Map Viewer Beta, the up and coming next generation version of the Map Viewer. And there's an amazing feature that is available right now in the Map Viewer Beta called blend modes. Blend modes are amazing. Now, your graphic design friends will be like, blend modes, yes, I love them. And you'll be like, ooh, tell me more. Well, guess what? You can start doing things with blend modes right in ArcGIS Online. So I have a map here with an imagery base map and a hillshade layer. Now, typically what you would do in the online environment would be to play with transparencies because you want some hillshade, you want some imagery. Well, okay, let's play. Well, with blend modes, instead of just transparency, you can say, here's a category called blending, normal, and then let's say color burn. Now, what color burn does, and it's kind of subtle, is it'll take the lightness and the darkness from the hillshade layer, and it'll boost the colors of the underlying content. So I'll turn off this hillshade to give you an example for what it's doing. On, off, on, off. And it gives you a kind of a painted in sense of the topography without those washed out middle tones, which is fantastic. What are some other examples of blend modes? There's a whole library of blend modes, and they're categorized by lightening, darkening. So let's do luminosity. So if I choose luminosity, that merges these two layers in an algorithmic way to create this really lovely, charming sort of base map that blends the hillshade and the imagery. So it gives you the tone of the hillshade and the hues of the imagery to get this really kind of wonderful, tactile and colorful, minimalist base map of the physical terrain of a place. So we're showing you this because we have base maps and there's all kinds of layers available to you. And Andy's been showing you how to mix and match base map elements. But now with blend modes in the Map Viewer Beta, there's really no end to the slicing and dicing and combining that you can do with this content to create your own sort of base map for whatever look that you're going for. It's a lot of fun.
So I was really excited when I saw this tool because it allowed us to consider a technique that we'd first used, many years ago when I was working on printed wall maps for both. I worked for both Rand McNally and for MapQuest at various times, and we used it in both of those companies to get a specific effect. I've created a map here. I took the charted territory base map created by Cindy Prostak, and I split it up to create separate layers for the detail on the top, and then the polygons on the bottom, which I just reinforced a bit, and then duplicated that layer. What that allowed me to do was something pretty special. And this is just a graphic, but it shows you how it worked. I was able to take those colors from the charted territory map and use the color blend to apply them to the shaded relief, so that the shaded relief now takes on the color of that specific country. The duplicated layer on top, I was able to use the multiply setting to then add that color back on top to give me this really subtle and really cool looking colorized relief behind the colors of each country.
It's rich and it's beautiful, and you don't have those washed out midtones that you get from just working with transparency.
And the color burn gives you a slightly more subtle version of it as well. I've worked with that too. So there's a lot of room to get some really nice effects, and then to sort of riff around them and try some of these other filters and see exactly what it is you can come up with. We're having a lot of fun. I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we hope we've given you a sense for the myriad possibilities for basemaps, the things that are available, the ways that you can manipulate them to create your own basemaps, and in general have a sense of empowerment over the way your maps look and how you're communicating your geographic data. Because at the end of the day, that's the whole point.
And thank you for listening.